Okay, so we move now on to our last two presentations, and the first one of those is from somebody I've known for a long time, but actually only met about a month ago, face to face, but Tess Davis of the Antiquities Coalition. So Tess, it's lovely to see you again, albeit back on Zoom, and over to you.
Great. Well, good morning and good afternoon, depending on where you are located. Again, my name is Tess Davis, and I'm the Executive Director of the Antiquities Coalition. And on behalf of our organization, sincere congratulations on this landmark anniversary. And we are so grateful to you for the important work you're doing to protect cultural heritage in crisis. For those of you whom I've not yet had the pleasure of meeting, the Antiquities Coalition is a not-for-profit organization and think tank dedicated to combating the illicit trade in art and artifacts, where business leaders, former government officials, archaeologists, lawyers, and others who recognize that cultural crimes are a threat to both our shared heritage and our global security. And in this mission, we are honored to join forces with a wide range of partners, including the United Nations, foreign governments, the US government, law enforcement agencies here and overseas, and groups like the Blue Shield, who are dedicated to safeguarding cultural heritage under threat. So given how complementary our missions are, I'm sure many, if not most of you joining today have been asked a question we receive often as well, and that is, in the face of war or natural disaster, how can we justify protecting cultural heritage, as if it were a choice between that and people, which of course it isn't. But I've heard that question a lot. Although I should say I've never heard it from those who are impacted most by crisis. Indeed, as some of you may know, I'm a proud resident of New Orleans, and most people I know, lost something to Hurricane Katrina here. Many lost everything, and that was 16 years ago now, and still to this day, what hurts them most is not the loss of the houses, of their cars, or their jobs, but the baby pictures, their parents' wedding album, or their grandparents' recipe book, or military uniforms. And, they would give everything, anything to have those things back, their family heritage. Of course, the cultural heritage of the wider Gulf Coast was battered, but survived due to the work of so many, including the Smithsonian, which was down here after the fact. But a hurricane plays out over a day along a large but finite track. And when it comes to conflict, for example, in Yemen, Syria, or Ethiopia today, or a generation ago in Cambodia, where I did much of my work before joining the Antiquities Coalition, these cultural losses are not restricted to families. They're magnified across entire countries and sometimes across entire peoples. At the Antiquities Coalition, as at the Blue Shield, a key part of our mission is supporting these communities in crisis. And I can say that our colleagues who have suffered so greatly in these situations, they have always stressed time and again that it's when you're faced with losing everything that makes you who you are, that's when heritage matters more, not when it matters less. It's quite the opposite. And that lesson has certainly always stuck with me. And it's one of the reasons why at the Antiquities Coalition, again, we're so grateful for the work that the Blue Shield does and so proud to be a supporter of your organization and partner. Of course, culture has always been used as a weapon of war. However, today it's also a criminal, terrorist, and insurgent financing tool. But complicating the issue is that many of the same groups that are financing their operations through an illicit antiquities trade are also targeting cultural, historic, and religious sites for destruction. And of course, it's critical to remember that these attacks against heritage are meant first and foremost as attacks against people. After all, once you destroy all that a people hold sacred, the things that matter most to them, the next step is so often to destroy the people themselves, which is why cultural crimes are atrocity crimes in and of themselves, but why they're also warning signs of worse atrocities to come. Both cultural destruction and looting are prohibited and even criminalized by the general provisions of international humanitarian law, dealing with civilian property, and that includes the Law of Geneva, the Law of The Hague, and customary international law. The 1954 Hague Convention, discussed so often today, and its two protocols, but also the 1998 Rome Statute, which created the International Criminal Court, reinforced these earlier protections with specific provisions on cultural property. And to get back to the Blue Shield, over the last year and a half, we've been very honored to partner with the Blue Shield in working to keep cultural heritage on the agenda of the International Criminal Court, as well as serve as an ongoing resource for the court's work. Last year, with the Blue Shield and the not-for-profit organization Genocide Watch, we challenged a ruling that we feared had the potential to weaken the protections that international law guaranteed civilian property, including cultural property, while we feared also risking undermining ongoing and future cases against those who would seek to intentionally destroy cultural heritage. And we did this by submitting an amicus brief to the court challenging the narrowly restricted nature of a recent interpretation made by one of its trial chambers in the case of Prosecutor versus Bosco Ntaganda. Our analysis sought to answer what sounds like it should be a basic question: what is an attack against cultural heritage under an international criminal law? But of course was far from it. See, in July of 2019, the ICC's trial chamber had convicted Ntaganda, who is a leader in a Congolese rebel group, 18 counts of war crimes and crimes against humanity. And while this case didn't make as many headlines as some of the other prosecutions, it was actually the highest amount of charges in any case to reach the judgment stage before the court. According to the trial chamber, Ntaganda held individual criminal responsibility for his acts committed in the early 2000s, and he was sentenced to 30 years in prison. And while this was the longest sentence ever handed down by the ICC, the prosecution felt that some of his criminal acts had gone unaccounted for, including the destruction of a church and a hospital. And it thus appealed on the grounds that the initial court had overlooked these incidents because of when they had taken place, that is, after the initial assault, and thus had felt that they didn't meet the court's definition of attack. And in our brief with the Blue Shield, we argued that if attacks were so limited, it would create this gap in time following active combat, in which cultural, medical, and religious objects would lose their protection. And also that those who destroyed such objects would become immune from prosecution. And this March, the appeals chamber issued its judgment in the Ntaganda case, which unfortunately in our eyes, at least, rejected the prosecutor's appeal in a 4-1 decision. Now, the one that is the dissent actually used our brief in support of his position. However, I do want to stress that despite our disagreement with the ruling, this doesn't mean the subject is now closed, because while the majority agreed to reject the appeal, they did so for very different reasons. And as a result, in the ones of one scholar, strikingly, there was a stalemate between the judges and their opinions. And so while this appeal was rejected, there is still not a consensus on this legal issue, we argued, and this issue is likely to come up again. And when it does, we hope and expect our brief will be of assistance. And another example of our work together also last spring, we were honored to work with the Blue Shield in submitting comments to the ICC on their newly developed draft policy on cultural heritage. And have to commend the ICC for attempting this effort to begin with. It's hugely important that they focus on this issue and also develop the expertise internally to do it. And this document is an example of the work they're doing on this front. It was the first of its kind, published in March by the Office of the Prosecutor, who requested comments from interested scholars and practitioners. And our coalition, which included both individuals and institutions with extensive experience in cultural heritage law and international criminal law and international humanitarian law, analyzed the current policy and developed a series of recommendations for strengthening it, and also expressed our support for this work and our availability to assist the court going forward. And the final policy was published on June 14th of this year. I encourage everyone to check it out if you're interested, and hopefully it will help to guide the court's work in the future. Beyond our work with the Blue Shield on the ICC, more recently, we've also been honored to partner on a recent policy brief through the Antiquities Coalition's think tank. We created the think tank in 2016 to serve as a resource to policymakers to help them strengthen their understanding of the challenges facing our shared heritage, but more importantly, to help them hopefully develop solutions to better protect it. And in 2018, it was honored as one of the world's best new think tanks from the prestigious Global Go-To Think Tank Index published by the University of Pennsylvania. And on October 21st of this year, the chair of the UK committee of the Blue Shield released a policy brief through the AC think tank that examines the UK's recent decision to repeal the EU regulation on the introduction and import of cultural goods in Great Britain. And Ms. Fionnuala Rogers, in addition to her work with the Blue Shield, of course, is founder and director of Canvas Art Law and an overall leader in cultural property law. So we were so thrilled to be able to work with her on this. And in her brief, she argued very convincingly that this repeal creates a gateway to Europe for illicit traffic through Northern Ireland, where the regulation still applies, and that the UK must take immediate steps to mitigate this risk. And we've been thrilled that Ms. Rogers' argument has really struck a chord. It has reached a large audience. The Art newspaper published an article on the brief in early November, and her perspective was also highlighted by The Telegraph in an analysis of the fate of the illicit trade in the UK, really connecting this issue to a more mainstream audience. And we also know that there are other media outlets are continuing to be interested, and there should be future articles and even interviews to come. So for all of you, please stay tuned for that. But in summary, again, these are just 3 examples of the work we've been able to do together, and we very much hope to continue it. The Blue Shield's voice is hugely important in keeping this issue on the agenda of those who seek to prevent and also seek to help individuals and even, again, entire countries recover from conflict. So we're hugely honored to work with you. Again, a very sincere congratulations on this landmark anniversary, and your work is making a huge difference. Thank you.
Tess, thank you very much indeed for that. And thank you for those kind words. Reciprocated back to you, of course, for all of the work that the Antiquities Coalition does.